Diamond Mozzarella by Tom Piccirilli. Read by Brian Keene. The capiche, in his ratty robe and smelling of pesto fungi, had been doing this kind of thing with the cat for about 6 weeks now, and I could tell that Nicky Franceschi was about to crack any day. Mama Capisci was upstairs saying her novenas, dressed in black and wearing the little hat with the veil, having knocked back 2 bottles of wine with lunch. She could really swing with the prayers when she'd put some vino away, and by 3 o'clock she was having a party with St. Anthony and St. Francis of Assisi, listening to her Jerry Vale records at full volume. In the old days, my father had been Don Capisci's chief enforcer, and I'd more or less inherited the position when my dad got smeared by a brownie troop on rollerblades when he crossed against the red at Columbus Circle. The trouble was that, except for my occasionally strong-arming the Chinese delivery kid when he forgot the extra soy sauce, there hadn't ever been much for me to do since I came on board. Finally giving in to Alzheimer's at the age of 78, and with a couple of 32 slugs in his temporal lobe since 1956, when the Fratelli sisters broadsided him outside of Steinberg's bakery, the capiche had held strong through the roughest times the family had ever seen. He'd gotten into and out of bed with the unions, staved off J. Edgar's crackdown in the 60s, survived 2 hits put out on him from rival mafioso, and once played golf with Castro in Havana. Now, when almost all the business was legal, and his fortune had been packed away into offshore holdings and retail outlets, he'd suddenly put together a rough crew and started kicking over jewelry stores just so he could drape his cat in diamonds. The new crew was run by a 2-time loser named Delgado, who'd already nearly gotten pinched again a week ago after the last heist. He'd been in the stir about half his life and still got a little maudlin whenever he talked about C-Block. The advice he took on the inside had made him an even worse heist man. He never realized the irony of taking suggestions from second-story men already in the pen. His time at Rikers had given him a real attitude, and he must have practiced curling his lip by watching Elvis movies, especially Charo. His crew consisted of 3 other ex-cons from C-Block, all named Billy, who liked to consider themselves cat burglars, even though they each weighed about 300 and were still putting more on thanks to Mama's baked mastacoli and tortellini Alfredo. Delgado and the Billies wore arsenals of Glocks and Brownings and Desert Eagles, and each of them kept a .22 down in an ankle holster. They had a nice hard laugh, coming way up from the bottoms of their rotund bellies, when they learned I didn't carry a gun. Nicky Franceschi started going to confession again. We could all feel the heat building as news of the thefts moved up onto page 3. But the crew didn't care much, since the capiche let them keep the gold, silver, and jewels, so long as they turned the diamonds over to him and his cat. The cat was named Mastrocitolo, which meant little monster. But Americans always bastardized the Italian language, and everybody just started calling him Mozzarella, or Mozzie for short. Teresa, the capiche's 20-year-old granddaughter, was spending her college break here in the city, and looked about as bored as I used to on summer break. Of course, I didn't have a horse ranch, the entire 17th floor at the Waldorf, or floor seats to the Knicks, so the parallel sort of stopped short. She also had the better part of the slick Goombas in Brooklyn, the artists in the East Village, and the high financiers on Wall Street, sending her everything from Pontiac Sunfire sport coupes filled with white roses to suicidal poems scratched into the wet labels on bottles of Dewar's. She was still bored. It made my heart tug to the left when I gazed at her in the living room, with her black curls drifting into her dark and eternal eyes. The angles of her body shone off to perfection as she lay on the couch, her blouse open 1 button too far, skirt up to give a tantalizing view of what I already knew so well as she stared me down. Considering how beautiful she was and how low a tolerance for inactivity she had, I wound up with a seriously bad feeling in my guts. Mozzarella, currently worth about $2.5 million, with a 5-carat, intense blue, pear-shaped diamond solitaire choker around his neck, purred as he brushed up and down my legs. Nicky Franceschi chewed his lips until they were white, grimacing at Mozzie. He'd been the concierge for the Capisci family for almost 40 years, and it was clear this thing with the cat had pushed him to the edge. We sat in the parlor, looking up the corridor at the kitchen, where the capiche was gumming his breakfast. It was 4 in the afternoon. Nicky watched the calico twine against me and whispered, "This is bad, Joseph." "I know." "We finally get in the clear, and now we got bugs on the phones again, and all kinds of surveillance. They got satellites, can count your nose hairs. Can you imagine how they're going to like seeing a cat strutting around in stolen Cartiers?" I thought he'd meant it was bad about Teresa being bored, but the feds jumping on us again wasn't any too sweet either. Nicky shook his head and tried to quit chewing his lips, but he couldn't quite stop. "Goddamn capiche doesn't even close the drapes." Mozzarella walked up the hallway and jumped into the old man's lap. The capiche sucked some more of his toast, absently stroked the cat, and stared straight ahead. He grunted, and after a couple minutes grunted again. After a while, I realized he was calling my name. I went to him and listened closely. He said, "Joseph, I don't think he's giving it all to me." "Who, Don Capisci?" "Delgado." "All the ice?" "He smiles too much." I agreed with that. For a guy who got dreamy about C-Block, Delgado went around through life looking way too happy with himself. Nicky slinked up behind me and swallowed loudly a few times. Teresa drifted in as well and grinned until her dimples were once again doing to me what they did to every other man who had a pulse. "The next heist is tomorrow night," Capiche said. "You'll go with them, Joseph." "Me, Don Capisci?" "Make sure they're turning over what they should." "Me, Don Capisci?" He turned in his seat and shot me one of those glares that 40 years ago would have sent most of Little Italy running for Staten Island. He still had it sometimes. When he glared at you like that, it looked like the 2 bullets the Fratelli sisters had put in his skull had crawled through his head to sit in his eye sockets. "Did you hear me, Joseph?" "Yes." "And take Mozzie. Let him pick out something special for himself. Whatever he wants, you make sure you get it for him." I shot an imploring glance over to Nicky, but he ignored me pretty well, still eating his lips. I wondered what would happen if I turned stooly, if the feds would set me up someplace where I could still get a good bowl of pasta vazul and didn't have to spend my Saturday nights bowling in Idaho with the Elk Club. Probably not. "Sure, Don Capisci," I said. Teresa stepped in, and I saw the excitement in her eyes. I knew it wasn't because she fancied marrying me and getting into the witness protection program and moving to Idaho. "No," she said to her grandfather, bringing her dimples out in full. "No, let me go on the job, too. I'll keep an eye on everyone and hold on to Mozzie. I'll make sure nothing goes wrong." A minute ago, the capiche had still had the old sharpness, and I prayed that if he had any Titan screws left, a couple of cards in the deck, he wouldn't let her go along. Nicky sat straight up and made a face like a baby with a severe case of diaper rash might make, but no sounds came out. I figured I looked sort of the same way. Teresa smiled some more and my chest grew warm, and Mozzarella cocked his head at me. "Okay, honey," the capiche said, his mouth full of wet toast because he'd forgotten to swallow it. "But dress warm." Jerry Vale got louder and louder, while Mama trundled upstairs and gawafed drunkenly with the saints. Delgado had picked a family jewelry shop over on Canal Street in the heart of the downtown jewelry district. I had to admit it was a good choice because it was an old, small building without any high-tech alarm work. Right next door, completely out of place on the block, stood a bookstore devoted to classic American literature. Delgado and the Billies planned on cutting through the wall of the bookstore and then more or less doing a smash and grab once they got inside the jewelry shop. It was the kind of plan just dumb enough to work once or twice, but by now the crew was really pushing their luck. The most sophisticated burglary tool they carried was a sledgehammer. When Delgado used the bolt cutters to clip the lock and lift the draw gate to the bookshop, Teresa let out such an "oh" of impressed delight that he actually blushed in the moonlight. The Billies made a hell of an effort to act tough walking up the aisles. In the hopes of doing something more manly than just shoveling copies of Steinbeck, London, Kerouac, and Thoreau onto the floor as they cleared the shelves, the Billies took to elbowing me out of their way as well. Delgado spun and brushed against me until we were nose to nose. "Quit getting under our feet." "Sure," I said. "You foul up this job and I'll bury you behind Kennedy Airport where nobody will ever find you." "Okay." "You think I'm kidding?" "No," I said. For good measure, he shoved me backwards into the counter and got out his buzzsaw. Teresa watched me closely, hoping for a little action already, her mouth always luscious and glistening. It took Delgado only a couple of minutes to shear through the sheetrock and crossbeams before he hit some brick. The Billies took off their shirts and got to work with the sledges, keeping the Glocks in their shoulder holsters so they could slick the leather with sweat. They did their best to inject a little swagger into their waddles and kept their stomachs sucked in. Teresa kept a firm grip on Motzi, who looked keenly around and took the whole setup in. Tonight he was going light and only wearing a diamond heart pendant with a floating bezel set going for around $750,000. I told her, "I don't know what you're waiting for." "I just wanted to watch a smooth operation like this, Joseph. It does a girl good to watch such fine skill and craftsmanship at work." "You shouldn't have come." She threw a little drawl into it, going for that Scarlett O'Hara touch. "Now why would you say that?" "There's always a chance of trouble." "Oh, really?" she said, smiling, still bored but having a bit of fun now as the friction began to build. "Not with you in charge." One of the billies stepped back and brought his sledge around so that the handle caught me in the ribs. Maybe he was clumsy, or maybe he was still trying to make an impression, but enough was enough. I could taste the pain rising in my throat like sauce with too much garlic, and the edges of my vision paled as I heard Teresa give a throaty, the same kind she occasionally made when we were in bed together. But all of that fell away when I spotted Motzi staring off at a wrought iron spiral staircase at the back of the room. I checked too, and saw somebody's foot resting lightly on the top step. Mozzarella jumped free of Teresa's arms, and side by side, he and I walked to the staircase and looked up to see a frightened woman huddled against the rail. She had bob brown hair, a smattering of caramel-colored freckles, and thick glasses that somehow made her extremely cute. She wore tight sweatpants and a black t-shirt that hugged her perfectly and showed off every curve and intersection. "Hi," I said. "Hello." As scared as she was, she followed through. I liked that. "Would you come down here, please?" "Okay." She took the spiral staircase easily, without a sound, to stand next to me. I caught a hint of lilac perfume and some fruity shampoo. She was a head taller than me, and probably had me by 20 pounds, but it was all solid. "You live up there?" "I own this store. If I'm working late, sometimes I stay over on a cot upstairs." "Oh, I see." Teresa kept watching me, grinning with that wet mouth, her eyebrows arching, the set of her features so self-assured that I could imagine her on the stand in front of the grand jury, completely composed and untouchable. A vein in her throat snapped, and even Motzi started to look uncomfortable. "Sorry about the wall," I said to the lady. She stared at the books being trampled under the billy's feet, and her bottom lip started to tremble. That didn't surprise me. I sort of got sick of seeing them destroy literature as well. Kerouac's Maggie Cassidy was one of my favorites. She held her hand to her face, and her glasses began to mist. Abruptly, she fell forward into my arms and sobbed against my chest. I patted her back and tried to keep from saying there, but I was at a loss and couldn't help myself. There, I said. The billies kept working at the brick, throwing sporadic sparks when they struck the stone. Delgado turned to protect his eyes and saw the woman crying as I consoled her. He showed me all of his teeth and screamed, "Where the hell did she come from?" "She owns the store and stays upstairs." "Oh, can I turn my back for 10 minutes? Did she call the cops?" I asked her, "Did you call the cops?" "No," she said between sobs. "There's no phone up there." "No," I said to Delgado. "There's no phone up there." His upper lip peeled back in a wolf's leer, and he made a motion to me with his chin. I shrugged, and he did it again and again, until I finally understood it was sort of a cut-her-throat gesture. He really was a ridiculous bastard. I stared calmly at him until he turned to the wall and watched the billies starting to make it through the brick. She finished sniffling and said, "You people are jewel thieves?" Well, they are," I said. "Technically I'm not. I just came along because of the cat." Teresa took it in stride, everything just another part of the festivities this evening. "Who are you?" she asked the girl. "My name is Margaret." "Hi, I'm Joseph," I told her. "Pleased to meet you." Teresa sighed and said, "Margaret, if you try to run, we'll splash your ugly brains all over these books of yours." Margaret just stood there and started crying again. Teresa gave me the smile, which was even pinker and wetter than it had been before. "Nice," I said. "You talk to all the boys at the sophomore mixers like that?" A crash of crumbling stone resounded in the shop, and Delgado said, "We're in." He and the billies vanished inside, where they wasted no time shattering glass cases and stuffing their sacks. They really had brought sacks, not briefcases, not bags, but sacks, full of watches, brooches, necklaces, and gemstone rings. I only saw a few diamond displays. I lifted Mozzarella and set him loose in the jewelry shop. "Go get yourself something nice, Motzi." He dipped and wove while I kept an eye on the crew to make sure they weren't taking more than they should be. Motzi stretched, pranced, and hopped up onto one of the display cases and sat expectantly, sort of frowning. Margaret sidled up beside me and said, "You let the cat get the jewels?" "Only the diamonds." She thought about it for a second. "You are one seriously messed up wise guy." "Don't I know it?" I watched as they loaded up about $3 million in jewelry and knew that no matter how much they stole, they'd still never buy a suit from anywhere but off the rack. Mozzarella sat on top of the case, his tail flicking. The billies had already busted all the locks. I stepped over and slid open the glass door. I took out the half-carat teardrop diamond necklace within. "Nice rock, Mozzie." Beside it were a pair of earrings, which I also slipped into my pocket. Delgado cleaned out the rest of the diamonds, put them in a separate sack, and handed them to me. I caught a whiff of potatoes. "We're out of here," he said. I checked my watch. 5 minutes since they first stepped inside. Not bad for 4 guys who collectively had the grace of a crippled water buffalo. We rounded up and I said, "Margaret, sorry again about the damage." I gave her the earrings and her eyes lit up. "Have a good night." As she drifted back onto the wrought iron spiral staircase, I sighed at the shapeliness of her body. Delgado got nice and crimson under his ears. "How do we know she didn't call the cops?" "I already asked her. There's no phone upstairs." "What are you, nuts? We can't just leave her." "Why not?" "Why not? She's seen us all." "Doesn't matter." "Like hell it don't. You introduced yourself, for Christ's sake." He drew his Glock, and that taste of garlic flooded my mouth again as I stepped into him, catching his wrist in my right hand and pulling him past me. The billies moved in slow motion, going for their pieces. I brought my fist hard against Delgado's elbow, hearing it crack, and pushed him backwards into the middle billy. The 2 others lurched forward, and I went down to my knees and reached out. Those stupid ankle holsters came in handy all right as I grabbed the .22s off their legs. I put a bullet in each one of their left kneecaps and listened to them yowl in tune, hitting the high F better than Jerry Vale ever could. Mozzarella sang with them for a minute and then leaped into Margaret's arms. Teresa squealed in a joyous way that made my breath hitch. Delgado had his Browning out but couldn't do anything with it. To make sure, I put a bullet in his other elbow and then fired at the last Billy's kneecap as well. The 4 of them rolled and called on the Virgin Mary and begged for their priests and mothers and the boyfriends they left behind on C Block. Teresa came up behind me and started biting my ear the way she did when we were really cooking. "Now her, Joseph," she said. "In case you missed it, I just shot these 4 idiots to save her. You know you can't let her walk out of here. You know she can finger us. Everybody already knows the Capiche is behind all these heists. If anybody wants to finger us, all they have to do is look at your cat. Teresa, please, let's just go, huh?" The Capiche had passed on that hard glare to her, and she used it on me. I looked into her eyes and felt the freezing drawl, and felt as if I'd been pushed into a tub of ice. "Finish it now, or you'll be finished. When my grandfather dies, I'm taking over the family. It's going to be like the old days, Joseph." "Yeah?" "Yes, we're going to expand and turn up the heat, and I'm not about to start off with a witness." "We're going to war with the other families?" "We're going to get back into all the action. Anybody who tries to stop us will roll over or get cut down." She couldn't help showing the tip of her tongue through her teeth just thinking about it, and she gave another "Finish it." The Capiche might have forgotten who I was by now, and Nicky Franchisi would cut me a lot of slack considering all we'd been through together. But Teresa Capiche would never give in. There'd be plenty of wars, and she'd win them all. She'd crush anyone who went up against her, hunt them down into the dust for any reason. She'd never let me go. "I told you that you shouldn't have come," I said, and shot her right in that delicious smile. It wasn't until I was nearly to Broadway that I realized Margaret was walking next to me, still holding the cat. Mozzarella's ice glittered under the street lamps. "How's the store doing?" I asked. "They just opened another Barnes & Noble 3 blocks away, and I've already lost 20% of my sales. I don't have the kind of insurance that'll cover what you people did here tonight. I guess I'll have to move." After another 3 blocks, she said, "Thanks for the earrings. You're really nice." She could stand to lose 5 or 10 pounds, but she had something I liked. I figured she could make one hell of a pot of pasta, too. "Hey, you ever been bowling in Idaho?"